All right, so Bob's going to tell a joke, and that'll lead us into me introducing you guys.
Okay. So this guy is gets into an Uber, and he gives him the address, and so the Uber driver takes off. He's going down the road, and everything's nice and quiet and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the guy in the back seat realizes, oh, I forgot to tell him. And so he reaches forward and he taps the Uber driver on the throat. The guy screams, "Let's go of the wheel." The car starts swerving all over the place, smashes into a mailbox, almost destroys a tree, and stops just inches away from the front door of a restaurant, and front facing the door. And so the Uber driver is breathing really hard and stuff like that. And the guy in the back seat said, I'm sorry. What did I do? He said, don't worry, it's not your fault. He said, this is my first day of being an Uber driver. Up to yesterday, I drove a hearse.
And with that, we open. I am your favorite Uncle Jared, and here I am talking to smart-ass people, not the least of which are the two people that are here with me today, and I'm so happy they are. Bob Walsh, or as I like to call him, the Reverend Bobby Love, is a pastor from Sudbury, Ontario, who I had the pleasure of working with at the Elgin Street Mission. Shout out to Jerry, who's still there, my brother. And I spent 3 years listening to him talk about grace and mercy. And I'm very happy to have him here today. Jocelyn Melder is actually the reason why we're here today, because she's friends with Shannon, and she encountered, I want to say, a semi-hostile post that brought up issues of race and working with one another and compassion, both for the people that are feeling oppression and for the people that are perceived as oppressors. And so I wanted to talk, because the idea that I had in doing this was not that we were just going to talk about really highfalutin, dispute resolution issues, but real subjects about how do we get along. And in this climate today where, well, let's face it, systemic racism is at the forefront of conversation. And getting along with each other, and what does that mean, and what does allyship mean, and how is it that we can be good to one another? I go back to where we come from, and for the longest time, long before there was a federalist social welfare system, long before there was governments taking care of people, communities took care of each other, and they were led by the church. And I think it is a birthright of the church. I think it is not often well done. I have seen just as much dysfunction and harm come out of the church as I have seen goodness and grace and mercy. And so there's going to be a lot of debate as to, is there a place for theology and religion in making society better, when the fact is that some of those institutions have harmed groups in a huge way. Mm-hmm. But I think that it starts with people coming together and understanding what we're really trying to do. So I welcome Bobby Love, and I welcome Jocelyn, my sister from another mister. And so just, I'm going to start with Bob. Tell me a bit about you, because I know you, but they don't. Tell me a bit about you and kind of your philosophy when it comes to working with others.
Well, basically, somewhere I played rock and roll. I did drugs. I did all that kind of stuff back in the 70s, and in mid 70s, my life desperately turned around because somebody had put a Bible in my my hotel room, and I pulled it out and I started reading, and I haven't stopped. So things really dramatically changed. That's just the piecemeal thing, but things dramatically changed for me. Somewhere along the way, I was reading what Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 25. And in verse 40, Jesus says there, whatever you do unto these, the least of my brothers, you do also unto me. And that leaped off the page and into my heart. And so my personal translation of that is the way that I treat the next person I meet is the way that I treat Jesus. So that includes the way I treat my wife. We've married 41 years. I have never called her a foul name. We have had maybe 5 what you could call arguments that all lasted about 3.5 minutes, maybe even in total, because I'm just like, this verse really penetrates me. And so, I mean, if it invigorates me and it frightens me, because the way I treat her is the way I treat him. And so at the mission, when you're talking about mercy and grace and all that kind of stuff, I mean, the way I treated every person that came into the mission is the way that it then has to be reflective of the way I would treat Jesus. So whether we're talking about discipline, it has to be done in that spirit of grace and love. I'm not trying to punish, I'm not trying to get you down, but when it comes to building or working with people, whether they're, because there were people of all kinds of nationalities that came into the mission, and about 30% of them were Native. And it was really, really important that this place right here, that everyone felt safe and felt loved and felt like they would be treated as a human being and not as a person from a racial profile of some kind, So that's the basic call.
Well, and I mean, you and I did that together for quite some time.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the cornerstones that I liked was that, we said we were faith, food, and family. And unlike some other services out there that came from a faith-based perspective, our services weren't tied to participation in faith activities. Our services, or what we gave to people weren't tied to some sort of statement or principle of, coming alongside. It's just, we were there. Coffee was for everybody. Jocelyn, I know Bob a hell of a lot better than I know you. So tell me a bit about you and where you come from and how you came to do what you do.
I love how Bob started. I think a little bit of my story. I grew up in a Christian home. And when I was, I'd say preteen, teenager, I started rebelling like most kids do. I started questioning things, started not believing the things that I had believed before, had been told to believe. But what really made a change in my life was seeing all the ways that I felt in that moment in my life where I felt powerless. And finding out about Jesus, this person who is God, who should have the most power ever, didn't really think about power as power over others or power over creation, but just thought about in Philippians 2, it talks about in the Bible, in the New Testament, in Philippians 2, this picture of Jesus making himself humble and taking the path of humility, not to consider equality with God something that you need to hang on to, but that he made himself nothing and that he came to earth in the human form so that we would understand what God's love even looks like. And so that was huge for me, coming from a place where I didn't feel I had power, and coming from a place where I didn't think I was significant or was lovable or was worthy, to understand that Jesus sees all that and knows all that and came down to earth to show us a better way. So that's a big piece of my understanding. Another piece of my journey as I grew was basically running away from God, running away from the call of God, finding any excuse to not follow the calling, which for me is to pastor, to minister, to come alongside others. And so that it was a tough call. It took me probably 20 years to go through the education, to go through the process of mentoring and community life, to get to the place where I can really accept what God is asking me to do. And I still am not clear exactly what that looks like, especially in our season of coronavirus, but what the church looks like now, what the church will look like in the future, but definitely following the call to to acknowledge and see the humanity in others, and to come alongside that and to show them the Jesus way and what I've learned and what I've experienced. And so that's what I'm really passionate about.
Okay. And I appreciate knowing that. And you come from a mixed family, right?
I do. So that's an interesting little piece. I appear white to the world. And that was a strange part of my identity formation as well. My dad is Sri Lankan, so he is brown in terms of his skin. My mom is German, and she's Canadian. So my dad was an immigrant, came here, met my mom. And so my sister and I are different colors
Oh, wow.
in terms of our skin tone. Yeah. So I grew up in a mixed race, mixed culture family. And there's all kinds of, we're still living that out as adults and trying to figure out what that looks like in this moment and what that means in this moment and the experiences that I've lived through. But part of my story I've told people is I didn't realize that I was a white person until I was 16 years old.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very interesting growing up in what I would say with my brownness, my brown family, being surrounded by the people who were closest to me are my aunties and my cousins and my uncles. And so I grew up in this environment where it wasn't really until I went to school, and even in school, I didn't really recognize that I was white. I was still gravitating towards people who were Southeast Asian, anyone who was considered other, or someone who wasn't, the dominant white person. And that would have been in the 80s and 90s. And I was gravitating towards anyone who wasn't white. And it was a very significant moment when I was 16. I was brushing my teeth before school, and I suddenly looked in the mirror and realized everyone looks at you and thinks you're white.
Yeah, no, and my family's First Nations. I'm the white sheep of my family. And it's, and so I that echoes with me. I hear it. So as much as anything else, because when people, not that tons of people listen to this, I mean, I do this not for anybody else. I do this for myself. I do this for the conversation. But this isn't an advertisement for Jesus. This isn't a ministry. This is really, I think, a discussion about how did we get here and how do we get out? In the work that I do with people, I often say, how, I don't care how you got here. I care how we get out of here. I care how we get further. And so when I was thinking about this, it was the idea that I've not heard for all of the wingnuts, and there's wingnuts of every ilk and every community has them. I've never heard or read Jesus say a bad thing. And actually my former father-in-law was one of those guys that really lived his faith, and he was a stand-up solid guy. And so I see these representations, and working with you and working with Jerry and working with Kevin, I got to see representations of people that lived consistently and congruently within the faith structure they were promoting. But you look around and you see the evangelical community aligning with Trump. You see, Christian communities staying silent in the face of atrocities. And I just don't know how we got there. And I don't know how we reconcile that.
Well, I mean, I've said to more than one pastoral friend, if what I see as evangelicalism in the United States right now is evangelicalism, I'm not one. I'm not one of them. I am truly heartbroken over the way I hear evangelicals talk about Trump and then refer to Obama. If your president is your leader, and God has put your leader in position, and Romans 13 is really, really clear about that. If that's true, then you needed to treat Obama with as much devotion as you're treating Trump, and you're not. And there's something wrong with that. I think what happens is our faith is supposed to be something that penetrates our heart. When it becomes an ideology, we walk away from it, and we're living by an ideology now. And this is what the ideology says we should do or be. This is one of the reasons why, except for one short mistake in my life where I took out a conservative, I became a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. And I call it a mistake is because I shouldn't be known as a conservative. I don't want to be a conservative or a liberal or an NDP. I don't want to be any of those guys. I don't want somebody else's idea of what that is to be reflected upon me just because they've got some idea of what that means, because I've used that term to describe myself. And I just don't think that that's a wise way to walk.
Jocelyn, where are you at with this?
I appreciate what Bob said. I think in some of my thinking about how did we get here, I think that there's a danger in anything, especially with religion and faith, when we practice reductionism, where we reduce something down or distill it down to something really basic and we don't actually flesh it out anymore. I feel like there's an inability in our culture to, just an impatience to actually really thoroughly think through anything or feel through anything or process anything. And that is being reflected through our culture and our society, but it's affecting the church. And so we're reducing the message down to something that you can simply say yes or no to, but not actually act on. So it becomes something we think about or something that we have a feeling about, but we don't actually really flesh that out. I think the biggest loss for us as a church right now is that we've lost the power of story. And so, I mean, so much of the gospel and the message is story. And that's the power of it. That's Jesus's mission, was story, was telling the story, living the story. Watch how I do it with me. And it takes a certain amount of patience and a certain attentiveness to pay attention to story. And I think that we've lost that.
And I tend to, and I think if you look at most old cultures, whether it was, an oral tradition or a pictorial tradition or whatever it was, I think all of us, had that concept of learning through story. And so I appreciate what you're saying with that. When it comes to it, if the church has lost its way, what are your guys' thoughts on how difficult it seems in that? Because I look at the church and I look at the necessity of accountability and the teachings that prescribe that tradition of accountability. I have a hard time reconciling that this church that is supposed to be built on love and grace and accountability has such a hard time expressing its own accountability for where it might have fallen short. How does that even happen? You guys have talked to pastors, you guys are pastors. How does that even happen?
Well, I think that part of there are a lot of pastors out there that are loving, caring, a lot of churches out there that are loving and caring, and they pull people in and they embrace people. In my first church, when they asked me to come and preach the call, the only picture they found of me in the yearbook that the previous pastor had of me, I was with a black girl. And so they thought this black girl was my wife. And so, this was a small country church, okay, in northwestern Quebec. And so, so they said, well, what if his wife is black? And, somebody else said, well, if she's black, she's black. If he's God's person, that's okay. There's lots of churches that are like that, it's a shock. It would be a shock to the community because she would have been the only black person in that community if that was true. But there's lots of churches out there that are loving and caring and want to do the right thing. And then there are the institutions that sometimes have forgotten their way, and they've They've grown as institutions, and again, that's a fall into ideology. And this is what we're supposed to be. This is what we're supposed to do. And even when they come out with statements of support for like Black Lives Matter, you know, the things that are coming out, they're coming out because they know that that's the right thing to do. And I don't know all of these guys, but I guess I'm just not naive enough to believe that they're saying the right thing. They've gotten somebody, they pulled together a committee to come up with this statement. They've said the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see that they're living the right thing. And I wish that I wasn't so jaded sometimes. Now I'm just talking about the church, but the truth is that happens for every actor or every governor or, you know, whoever says everybody wants to say the right thing right now. And, you know, let's hope that they've lived it before they've said it.
Well, and I remember back to a message you gave one Sunday, and you talked about how everybody kind of gets bent on Thomas because he's doubting Thomas, but really all he was asking for was verification.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it seems to me that one of the things that I think, you know, for my community and not just the Indigenous community, but the communities of poverty and the people who've been disenfranchised and kind of left behind by the church, that's what they're looking for. So it's, you know, what do you think, Jocelyn?
Can you rephrase the question? Sorry.
Well, it's, you know, I'm just kind of trying to piggyback on what Bob was saying there, and it's, you know, it's they're saying the right things, but what are some of the, what's the sibboleth? What's the thing that we can look for to be able to discern that it's actually a movement in the right direction? Where's the stigmata? What's the password? How do we as people who are not involved in the church be able to say, you know what, this actually looks like a good thing?
It's really hard because listening to Bob, I have all the same frustrations and jadedness, I guess, about statements that come out from all of our churches and denominations. It's just really difficult. I think I resonate with you, Jeremy, about accountability. Like, where's the accountability and where's the proof in the pudding, or where's the receipts for the work that you're doing? What does that look like? So we make these statements because we think they're the right things to say, but then it just becomes a soundbite. And so what's the next step? I think for me, the first step in any kind of accountability is speaking the truth. And then if you're not the one that's speaking the truth, you have to actually pay attention. It goes back to that attentiveness thing, and listen, and actually like hear it and actually listen to that. And so I don't think there's a lot of listening going on. Maybe in our churches or from the church into the world, like the church isn't listening to those outside of. It's sort of that in-group, out-group thing that Christians were so good at that. We, even in our language, we say Christian and non-Christian. We divide up the whole world into two categories, which is not helpful. It's not helpful. And we've lived with that false dichotomy for so long, Christian, non-Christian, and then how do you find a way to listen to the other person? We've made a big deal out of who's the in-group, who's the out-group, who's this person, and then who's the other. And I don't find that helpful either. So I think the only way towards accountability is speaking the truth and being willing to listen to truth, to hear the truth. And it goes back to humility. That's just lacking. We don't have the patience to do the listening and then the humility to acknowledge the truth, because it's going to be uncomfortable. And we don't want to be uncomfortable. And that's another thing that the church has been on this trajectory of becoming quite comfortable, especially in Canada, because we are the dominant religion and we've become quite comfortable in our role. And so that's not helping us to be the prophetic voice. That's not helping us to speak to the margins. That's not helping us when we are the dominant voice, which I don't think we ever should have been.
And I think that that's a really good idea, that, a good way to put it. When somebody makes a statement, I want to see the receipts. I want to see what you've done. On the same level, we both believe in conversion, and that this guy who has really racist attitudes can change. you know, and can look in a new way, and which is one of my problems with cancel culture. So somebody uses the N word 18 years ago, and all of a sudden he's got to lose his job today. You know, that was 18 years ago. Who is the man that he is today? And has something really woken him? I was reading an article just recently about a guy who said, I just never realized what kind of racist attitudes I had developed over my life. And so, I mean, yeah, this is the thing that's woken him up. He's woke. Whoa.
Well, and so, you know, two things. So first, when we talk about we believe in conversion, we're not talking about conversion therapy. This isn't about
definitely,
because that's just garbage. The second part is that, and it's something that I think that probably, you know, this is where I see anger getting in the way. I mean, you've got 500 years of anger, of a system that has failed and sometimes willfully so, to protect people. But again, I mean, I wouldn't do the work that I do if I didn't believe that people could grow. You know, I don't necessarily think people change, but I believe we can grow. And I believe that that's part of it. So, you know, I appreciate the idea that when we're looking for this stuff, it's also hopefully trying to be at least somewhat objective. And if we see the receipts, you know, maybe don't fully trust, but, you know, opportunities are good. You know, so this is one thing that I would hope for from today is, you know, if you could say one thing to the Christian community, because I trust both of your voices, you know, and I trust your intentions, and I know that there are people out there who, with the best of intentions, are hurting people, you know, and I don't think they're doing it willfully, but I think that they're doing it ignorantly. You know, it's what are the messages that, you know, you would give them to help them to see that we need to be able to move forward with love for everyone and grace for everyone, and that it's not that God did not make a preferred skin color. You know, like, what would you say to them?
Joss, what was that article you wrote that was responded to? What did you say in that article?
Oh, that was, it wasn't an article, it was through social media. And I had just shared about what had happened in the House of Commons here in our country, about what happened with the NDP leader and how he was called out. And I had some opinions about that. And so I just shared very generally. I didn't really actually put much of a statement on it. I just wanted to share that I was very brokenhearted that this is what's happening in our country. And then the response that came out of that was unexpected, and it was difficult. And I thought, here's an opportunity in a very public way to engage. And I hear you, Bob, when you say cancel culture is not helpful. And that goes back to, we have no patience to be attentive and to listen, because if I cancel you because I don't agree with you, or if you're hurting me and I'm uncomfortable, I'm just going to cancel you. That's not helping us move forward. And so I saw that as an opportunity to, I'm not going to cancel my friend, or I'm not going to shut this conversation down. I'm going to engage, and it's going to get messy and hard, and it did.
All right. So again, what would you say as a result of that kind of thing to Jeremy's question about what would you say to the church?
I think one of the questions I've been sitting with, and this comes through some of the podcasts I've been listening to and the reading I've been doing just even in the last 2 months, I served in a church for 3 years as a worship leader. And so a lot of my job in the church on Sunday was navigating, how do you welcome people in? We talk a lot about welcoming. We talk a lot about creating space, not necessarily safe space, but creating space for everyone to feel welcome. And what I've been hearing from Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, is that there's the sense that they're not fully welcome in church space. And that is something I've been wondering about. You know, we say we're people of grace. We say that everyone is welcome. We have this low bar, and, you know, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, what your experience is. You come through the door, it's church for everyone. The table is for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering the lived experience of people who've been saying this to me, but I don't feel welcome, or I feel like I have to leave a part of myself or a part of my identity at the door. And I can't actually enter fully with everything about who I am when I come in. And that's not just race, that's a lot of stuff. And so I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about how privileged is our church space.
Yeah.
Like how do you engage in this conversation with other Christians in identifying privilege, not just white privilege, all kinds of privilege, and what is the equalizer? How do we all come to the table and not just all have a seat at the table, because to me that's kind of representation, but how does everyone at the table have a voice?
Yeah.
Those are some things I've been thinking about.
At the mission, you walk into, the average Pentecostals are not on the other side of the tracks anymore. And so a person from the mission wearing the clothes that they wear walks into a Pentecostal church and automatically looks different and feels set out, set back from everybody else, whether people greet them or not. And, they're going to feel that way. They can't help it. It's a cultural thing, and it's going to happen. But every couple of years, I would talk about how, we need to apologize. The church needs to apologize for the way that it's treated people that have come in from the street to the church. Because regardless of whether they were native or whether you see, here's one of the problems. I don't even know if I can say that anymore. It was really
terms, yeah.
It was really common back when we were running the mission to use the word native, and everybody agreed with it.
Well, and actually, half of the indigenous people there refer to themselves as native. So it's
okay.
Yeah,
So
it's the term today is indigenous, but I'll allow this.
Okay. So, regardless of what the person's nationality is, there are some people from the mission that don't bathe a lot. And so right away, you are totally, completely uncomfortable. And there is really a James chapter 1 problem here. And James chapter 1, James talks about if somebody poor comes in, you say you sit over there, somebody rich comes in, you come sit up here really close to the front, you give them the best seat kind of thing. And so James says these things ought not to be. And so, I know that because I've talked with people at the mission, I know that they've been gently hinted at that they're not welcome. Nobody would say it because Jesus wouldn't say it, so you get away with it by subtle hints, and it's wrong. And I've talked, when I got a chance to talk to churches about this, when I went representing the mission, I would mention that from time to time, that this is really important. These are real life people, and you don't know who this person is. January the 16th, 1975, I was hungover. My eyes were just from the drugs I had been doing on January 16th, 1975. You would not have said, there is a preacher. January 17th, 1975, I gave my heart to Jesus. And so if you rejected me on the January the 16th, you had no idea about who I was going to become on January 17th.
Yeah.
And that's the big, this is why we have to treat everybody as if they were Jesus, because we have no idea, not just who they are is incredible, but who they can become is even more incredible.
And so when I hear that, I hear you talking about the encouragement and support of everybody towards their greatest potential, and not that a church is necessarily trying to make somebody something they're not, but rather to encourage them to their best self. And that was always the stuff that we did. Now, I'm a Matthew 25 guy myself. I mean, as a dispute resolution guy, I'm Matthew 18 all the way. But what I appreciated was that as much as the thing that you spoke to, that which you do unto others, I like that in the very next one, in what 41 or whatever, he says, and that which you don't do unto others, you also do unto me. So it doesn't, there's not just a requirement, in my view, of, going out because you want to do it for, it's the acknowledgement that when you hold back, the acknowledgement that when you don't ascribe to do that great thing, to hold, I mean, because it's, the great commandment and the great commission, go and Bob, actually, if either one of you can say those things because you know them better than I do. But when he says love your neighbor as yourself, he didn't just mean the ones that look like you. It wasn't, and let's be really clear. I mean, and Bob, I know that you know this because you've been over to Israel. There were not any white people in the Middle East at the time of Jesus's birth. There were no white people there.
Yeah, no blue eyes.
No. So are there, for the people that are going to come in contact with this, and I appreciate what you said to the church about accountability and being responsible and cleaning out the spar in your eye before you look at the speck at others. I appreciate that. Are there specific scriptures that can help people that are dealing with that type of exclusionary practice? Are there things that people that are maybe, not as conversant in theology or Christian theology as you guys are, where if somebody who was professing their Christian faith was trying to be exclusionary and using Jesus as a weapon, that somebody could say, well, you need to consider this. Well, if you saw that, what would you say?
Here, I believe it's James 1:19. I'm back in James again. Forgive me, but I think that this could be part of the healing process, and I'm just repeating what you've already said, Jocelyn. But James says, "Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slower to get angry."
Yep.
If that was the way we approached people and approached this situation, there's hope that the hearts of people would be listened to.
Jocelyn, what would you add to that?
Oh, goodness. That's a great one. I love James for that reason. I think another thing I've been thinking about, love your neighbor as yourself. We have a lot of trouble loving our neighbor, but I've been wondering if it's because we're really bad at loving ourselves. I find it weird that's the core of the message, and that's what Jesus wants us to do. But are we actually loving ourselves? Are we actually accepting of exactly who we are? Because if we can't even do that, then obviously we're not loving our neighbor well. Because for me, it's both and I think we're in a crisis in some ways in terms of loving ourselves, and then no wonder we can't love our neighbors. We can't love anything outside of ourselves. Maybe we're a little too introspective or consumed with ourselves trying to figure that piece out. But
well, and I think fearful. I mean, I think these days everybody is so concerned with the loss of their standing or their position or their community, when realistically the earth has been in a constant series of transition and change and growth from time immemorial. That it seems short-sighted to think that this is all things are going to be and this is all they will ever be, when it's never been this way until now. So I think it's a great point, Jocelyn, and my hope as we move on from here, because I'm going to start to cut us off, is I know that there are people from my community that have a sour taste with the church, and rightfully so. You know, I love what Bob said one time. He said, you know, they gave them Bibles and whiskey and said, use each accordingly. And I've carried that with me. And the truth is that if we were, you know, if the church was part of the author or one of the authors of this dysfunction, that hopefully at some point we can allow that opportunity to help be part of the restoration. And so I thank you both for being here. If people are interested in stuff, I ask everybody, what's one organization that you really think is great that not enough people know about? And where should they look if they want to find out more good stuff like this?
Joss?
Bob?
One organization.
Like, who's the person they should listen to about this? Like, I know that you're both deep into the reading stuff. So it's in terms of getting better at this, where should people look? Who should they read? Who should they listen to?
Now, I know that the Kielburgers are in big trouble today with the We stuff, you know, the We organization. Yeah. But We has done tremendous work reaching out to all kinds of different people in all kinds of different places to make their lives better, to get education out there and stuff like that, and to understand people. Now, I know that they've got some weaknesses, and they've got some. You're not going to be that big and not have problems. But there is some really good stuff with the We organization.
Okay, so people should look there.
Yeah, and I don't have anybody that's being paid $300,000 in my family to speak for them. Okay.
Fair enough. Okay, Jocelyn, who else?
I don't know that I have an organization, but in terms of like listening to things or reading things or what's been forming my process in the last few months, I would recommend. I've been reading a lot from Desmond Cole. That was up on my social media page like 3 months ago. He has written a book called The Skin We're In. It's really important to me that we find Canadian voices as much as we want to speak to what's happening to our neighbors to the south. I think we need to spend our energy on our country, what's happening here, because we can use all our rage and anger elsewhere. And I would love to channel that into constructive sort of journeys and things here in our country. So Desmond Cole, the book, The Skin We're In, it's a CBC documentary as well. He started with that. He's a Canadian journalist based out of Toronto, a Black Canadian, and sharing lived experience. That's been a huge journey for me. I'm still deep in his book. It's been eye-opening because we talk about, not just with Black lives, we talk about Indigenous people, and what's happened in Canada was so long ago. We keep saying it's so long ago, or I keep hearing from people, you know, get over it. No, actually, it's still current. It's still happening even now. And so these systems that are at play in Canada, and I think in Canada, the systems we have are insidious. And we are polite. We pride ourselves on being polite. So we're not good at talking about what's actually going on. And so part of it is learning some new information, like reading these books, but also getting into conversation with people and being honest about the areas where we have gaps. We don't know all the things. So that, again, takes some humility and just dismantling the privilege in our lives and seeing that there's other stories in Canadian experience that we may not be aware of. And so I would recommend that book. The other person for our Christian brothers and sisters who might want to listen to, I just found her also 2 months ago. She's actually American, so this breaks my Canadian only rule, but she's amazing. A Christian pastor, and she preached a sermon, which you can find on YouTube if you just search for Oshita Moore. And she did a sermon on responding to the powers, and she's based out of where was she based out of? I think Minneapolis, but she's amazing. I've been following her podcast and listening to her because of her thoughts on how we can show up and see the humanity in one another, and that's probably the way forward for the church. And so I really appreciate what she's saying in her American experience, but I think that can get applied
So her first
to the
name
church as well.
Oshita?
I will, let me look at the spelling, because it's Oshita, but it's actually Oshita Moore, but it's actually Osheta.
Oshida.
but it's Oshida Moore.
Okay.
Amazing, amazing.
I'm gonna Google her on YouTube after this. Okay.
Yes,
Wonderful.
she has a lot to say about the power under instead of the power over, and what we should be doing as Jesus people. So it's great.
Well, and as two of my favorite Jesus people, I just want to thank you for being here. And I would encourage everybody, because I know that for some people listening to this, this is way out of left field, seemingly for me. But the truth is that I think as community, we are many facets and many people in many sectors. And if you're interested in learning about stuff, you go talk to the people that are scary to you. And if you're in the Christian community, that means talking to non-Christians. If you're in the non-Christian community, that means talking to Christians and figuring out what it should actually be. And as a personal thank you, I just want to say to Bob and Jocelyn that I dig you both. And thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and stop recording. So say bye.
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 Bye.